Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast, where we want you to thrive in the ministry God has called you to. We truly believe that God's placement has purpose, and we're here for you with encouragement and tools for the journey.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Olson. It has been a little while since I've recorded one of these because we took a little break in October with the Overflow Worship Conference kind of being at the forefront of our minds, and I can't wait to tell you a little bit more about that in another episode. And then we actually pre-recorded all of November's episodes back in like May or something like that. So it's been a while. I had to make sure my microphone was plugged in right and all of the things just so that I was ready to go. But I am excited to be back, and I'm really excited about our special guest today. You are going to be so blessed to hear from him, his story, and just the things that God has laid on his heart for ministry. And so I just want to welcome all the way from Nashville, Josh Waugh. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being willing to do it. So Josh, why don't you just kick us off, tell everybody a little bit about where God has you right now.
Well, my name is Josh Waugh, W-A-U-G-H, Waugh, just like that. Just a good way to remember it. I am the minister of contemporary worship at First Baptist Church of Hendersonville, Tennessee, which is just 15, 20 minutes right outside of Nashville area. I've been there for a little over 3.5 years, and the Lord is just doing some incredible things to this church. Some things he's doing in my life with this position. I came on as the associate worship pastor, kind of being underneath our worship pastor here who leads the choir and orchestra. And then they're kind of changing my title and having me focus on a little bit different aspects of contemporary worship, but contemporary worship for all generations. So it's been kind of cool to see the evolution of my position over the past 3.5 years.
Cool. That's amazing. I love that. And yes, I guess I forgot Hendersonville is not technically Nashville.
Technically, yes. Technically.
I'm still learning my way around the very confusing roads of Nashville.
I get it. I'm still learning.
Yeah, I feel like we were just down there not that long ago, and my husband was like, none of these roads make any sense. They're not parallel. They're not in grids. They're just kind of like windy everywhere. And
they have like 5 different names for every single road. And you just never know who is talking about what. And
yes. And we were like, how do you pronounce that one? And there's like 6 different options of how it could possibly be pronounced.
Oh, yes.
And our 2-year-old, we had Siri going so much that she would go, Siri, stop.
The life of parenting.
Yes, I know. I'm like, don't say that because she will stop and then we'll get lost. Yes. So, you and I chatted back in the springtime, just a little bit about your story and kind of got to know one another. For those of you who weren't at the Overflow Worship Conference, Josh was there and was just such a blessing to our attendees, talking about some really needed and necessary topics about, bridging the gap between generations and engaging all generations, and just the beauty of the church across generations, the fact that it is multi-generational, mm-hmm. and that's a beautiful thing to embrace. And so, as we chatted, I just knew this was something that we needed to cover at the conference. And then afterwards, I just was like, man, we need to get this on the podcast because it's so powerful and so good. But before we get there, just tell everybody a little bit about your story, how you got to where you are today, just whatever you want to share with people.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, I've been here for 3.5 years at First Baptist Hendersonville. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. Susie is my wife. We've been married 8 years this coming summer. And we have 3 daughters. Bella Grace is 6. Juliet is 4. Jane Kate is 8 months old. So if I start getting sleepy in the middle of this interview, you will know why. But we're maybe turning the corner with the baby sleeping through the night. I'm the only boy in the house. We have a foreign exchange student right now that's living with us for a season. So that's been cool to have another dude in the house for at least a little bit.
Yes.
But it's just 3.5 years ago, we thought we would be in Florida forever.
Mm.
All of our family was there. The Lord was doing great things at my dad's church there. I got to serve with my dad for almost 3 years at the church that I grew up at. He's been pastor, the senior pastor. He was there, senior pastor for 32 years. He's still there serving in a part-time position. So I grew up in the church, grew up as a pastor's kid. Susie actually went to that church. Her and her family is still at that church. And
Wow.
when I went away to college, I felt a calling to youth ministry. I gave my life to the Lord at a young age and just continued to grow in my relationship with the Lord. But as I continued to go through college, uh, just youth ministry in general made such a huge impression on my life that I just thought, man, I would love that to do that same thing for somebody else. I saw
Mm.
what it was like for my dad to be a senior pastor, and I just thought, I don't know if I could ever do that. That senior pastor calling was just such a big deal for me, especially at a young age. That made such a big
Yeah.
impression on me and my family. And so anytime I was in youth group, college ministry, young adult ministry, I always had a guitar because that was just a thing. Like you just had to be able to do music on the side.
Yeah.
Susie and I got married a year after I got my degree from Samford University in Birmingham. 4 months later, we got pregnant with Bella Grace, and that changed the game. She was 20, I was 22, and we had to grow up really fast. Like it
Yeah.
was a big deal for us
Mm.
to know that we were starting a family. Um, we, I don't know if it was that we got scared, but we always knew we wanted grandparents for our kids because I
Yeah.
didn't grow up with grandparents. My grandparents were always Kentucky, Missouri, far away from Florida, and Susie did have extended family. So when we had an opportunity to go back down to Florida, there was a part-time position open at my dad's church, and I was able to work with my dad for almost 3 years, moving into a full-time role. Again, student ministry, college ministry, and then when we lost our worship leader, I just said, "Hey, Dad,
Yeah.
I can grab the guitar. I can cover for a little while until you get your next
Yeah.
person."
Yeah.
So Susie and I, there we were with a baby. I was doing music on the side, doing young adult ministry. And after several months of leading in music, Dad said, "Hey, we just want to keep using you for our contemporary worship services. We think you could be a good fit." So that's when my role changed to just young adult ministry and music ministry. And so I just learned growing up through the church, hey, my extended family, my grandparents could be sitting in the pew, and I was a youth pastor, so I knew how to connect with teenagers. So it's kind of like this multi-generational mindset was forming
Mm.
in my brain on how to connect the generations. And so when I finished my time at my dad's church, I told my dad, I said, "Dad, I don't have another job lined up, but we feel like my season's coming to an end, and we would
Mm.
love to see where God is leading it. But because I've grown up in the church, I didn't put an ending date on my resignation letter. I said, Dad, I'm going to give it to you, and you can decide my ending date, and we can see where the Lord leads." And that guy kept me for another 4 months.
Of
I
course
tease my
he did.
dad.
Yeah.
He said, let's get through Easter. That was January of 2016. Let's get through Easter. I took an interim position after leaving my dad's church, and that interim position, I was there for 8 weeks. And on week 3 was when First Baptist Hendersonville reached out,
Wow.
and they said, we're looking for a young guy who can lead a band. Would you have any interest? And we said, "Oh yeah, where's it at?" And he said, "Nashville." And we were like, "Nope, we're not going
No.
to Nashville." And the Lord was just so faithful. Pastor Greg here at the church, he kept reaching out. He said, "I really think you could be a good fit." We ended up visiting the church, and we felt such a peace about our kids. At that point, we had 2 kids, two young ones at home, and we were still young. And we took the leap of faith, moved to Nashville, and that was the first time I did full-time worship ministry, full-time worship position, just
Mm.
music. So it's been really cool to see that happen.
Wow, that's amazing. I love how God works, and I love just when, obviously he's still writing such a cool story for you guys, but when you get to a point and you can look back and see the pieces of the story that he has been writing and just how faithful he is. And, even in when you're like, nope, we're not going to Nashville, and for the church to continue to pursue you and for God to maybe be speaking through that.
Mm-hmm.
That's just such a beautiful thing, and something for me that has been so incredible over the last year as we've launched into more ministry and getting to just see what is going on in the church with a big C. You know, I've been able to do these ministry events in different churches, and then talking with people like you and like, you know, EB and Shane and other people
Yeah,
who are at the conference, and hear where they're at and what God's doing in their lives and in the churches they're serving at. It's just so exciting to
it
me.
is.
And it's just beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, it is exciting, and to see those pieces come together, even working with EB at the Overflow Worship Conference was just really cool to see the hearts aligned and to see how EB and I never knew each other before that, but because of Overflow Worship Conference, we saw how God was both moving each other in that same direction, and to be able to do that at the conference was incredible. It was great.
Cool. Yeah. It's it's just a beautiful thing. And it's amazing to stand back and say, wow, there's no way that man could fabricate this.
Mhm.
You know, just even what God is doing at First Baptist Hendersonville, and what God is doing at, you know, the church I was at a few months ago, and the, you know, what all of these
Oh yeah,
places, it's like no man could fabricate that when we sit and have conversations like this, and just get to hear stories about God's faithfulness. I love it, and it gets me excited.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, thanks for sharing. You know, you talked about God birthing something in your heart when you were at the church your dad was senior pastor at, about multi-generational worship, and just, you know, probably, you know, having people of all ages on the platform,
Hmm.
and how to work in that and thrive in that, and how to honor, you know, the all the people involved, but really more so just how to encourage those relationships, right? And to encourage bridging that gap. So tell us a little bit about how, you know, how that really started in you, and how God has continued to birth that in you and work through you in that.
Yeah. So one of the stories that I shared it at the Overflow Worship Conference, and I tell people all the time, is when I started doing music on the side of my college years, I remember my granny sitting down with me in Kentucky, and she was telling me a story as she heard that I was doing music. She told me a story about how her home church wanted to reach young people, and which is awesome. Like I'm grateful that I'm a part of a church that says we want to reach the next generation. But she said that the mode in which they were going to reach young people was just going to contemporary music only. Modern worship was the way to go. So they were going to reach young people through contemporary music. And she said the day she went back to her home church, this is a person who her husband had served over 40 years in ministry as a pastor. They had settled down after he retired in a home church. And when they made the switch to contemporary music, she said she went to her home church and she was not able to sing a single word of a single song because she didn't know
Wow.
any of the music. She could not connect in music and worship. And this was her home church. Like, she
Yeah.
loves the church. She loves reaching young people. Her husband had given 40 plus years to ministry. So they were, the perfect people to be able to say, we love this church. And she said she was so sad when that happened. And I just looked at my granny. I said, Granny, if I ever lead a worship service,
Huh.
I want to make sure that if you're sitting in the audience, if you are in the congregation, I want to make sure that you're able to sing at least one song with us, to know that you are honored and you are valued and you can sing and worship to God with every single generation. And because of that, that one seed has just been a common thread through everything that I've done. So
Mm.
when at Overflow Worship Conference and at other conferences, I always encourage worship leaders. If my granny walked into your church, would she be able to engage in music and worship in your service, or would you
Mm.
completely disconnect her from what you're doing? My job, I'm minister of contemporary worship, and I have to think through, if my granny sits in the pew, would I be able to lead her to the throne through music and worship, being
Mm.
able to honor the generations that have come before us, but also to be able to connect with the generations that are to come. And that's kind
Yeah.
of what has birthed into that multi-generational mindset for me. Here at First Baptist Hendersonville, we've just went through a season where we didn't even say contemporary and traditional. Greg led choir and orchestra, and he wasn't even what people would call traditional. He did Hillsong, Phil Wickham, like he did arrangements
Yeah.
for a choir and orchestra, but he was doing contemporary music. And for me, I lead a hymn every week with the band. So you could
Yeah.
walk into a contemporary service, but we're singing a hymn that everybody may have grown up
Mm.
in the church with. And so for me, I just kind of think through, how can churches of all sizes and styles continue to bridge the gap from the generations? I don't think music doesn't have to be as divisive as people make it. Yes, music can be divisive, but I
Yeah.
think music can be one of many tools to connect the generations in worship, that we
Yeah.
bring people on a journey through the service. And as we go through each of the songs, there may be some new ones, there may be some songs that we sing over the people, some songs that we need for reflection, for confession, moments of remembrance, but there may be some that are exciting, that are of the future. And that's what has birthed this multi-generational thing, is how can we connect the generations with music as a tool to lead up to the proclamation of God's word. If God's word is for every generation, I think music and worship need to be included in that, that it's for every
Yeah.
generation, not just for some.
Yeah, I love that. And it's like, I'm sure you found too, as I found, that it's also about being willing to be a teacher on the platform. That doesn't mean you yap endlessly
Yeah,
from the platform, but it does mean that just kind of bringing people along with you. Like,
yeah,
hey, we're gonna sing a brand new song, and here's the chorus. Like, just learn this little chorus with me, and so that maybe brings an older generation along, that it's a brand new song, they don't know it, and maybe all the kids know it but they don't, and then vice versa. Like, hey, students, this is a hymn that is so rich. If you really sit and listen and really sit and soak in the words, you are going to be blown away at the beauty and the power. And I just find that there's so much beauty in that, and so much unity in being willing to bring the people along. Because I think a lot of times we're afraid to say it from the platform, or we don't want to say too much, or it's just we don't know what to say, or we don't want to, I don't know, just cause too much of an interruption. But it's
yeah.
important to like bring people along with us and say, this is what we're doing. And I'm sure you found that too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Some of the practical things that I encourage other worship leaders with is, what are the things that your congregation would be with you if they just knew why you were doing it? There
Yeah.
may be a missing piece in which they would totally be on board with it if they understood why, which is why I tell worship leaders all the time, good opportunity to introduce a new song is as people are walking into the service. As they're walking in, hey, as you find your seats this morning, we want to introduce a new song to you. It could be a hymn, or it could be a contemporary song, whatever the case may be. Special songs, one of the things that I tell people all the time is, sometimes the church is waiting for the excuse not to sing. So I think of people who are new to church environment and to the church world. I think of dads who may be stressed out and they're visiting a church for the first time, and they were just overwhelmed with finding their kids where they need to go in children's ministry. They're in a new world to them, and for the worship leader to say, hey, this may be a new song for some of you. We want you to sit and listen as we sing this over you as a prayer. And
Yeah.
next week, we would love for you to join in and sing it with us. I mean, I feel like you give the congregation an out of saying, wow, this is a moment where I can be poured into, where it's not
Yeah.
expected of me to try and learn a new song. Even here at First Hendersonville, one of the things that the pastors had groomed me with and taught me to do is to try and do familiar songs at the end of service after the sermon, so that people aren't focused on learning a new song, but
Yeah,
that they can
that's good.
respond to what God has said to them and be reflective with a song that you've introduced in the past. Even with millennials, Gen Z, this next generation, we have to remember that hymns and contemporary Christian music will sound different to them, but they won't know the difference. It's internal language
Right.
for worship leaders and in the worship world. But the unchurched millennials and the next generation, under Gen Z, who is the sons and daughters of millennials, if you say, hey, here's a new song that we're going to do, and you introduce oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise, they're not going to know the difference between that and the lyrics from King of Kings from Hillsong Worship that was just released a couple months ago.
Yeah. Yep.
We're coming on to a new generation that is unfamiliar with the churchy words we use in worship.
Yeah.
Which is also an opportunity to teach the hymns of the faith to the next generation and still be able to honor the generations that have come before us. So that's some of the things that I try to keep in mind when it comes to practically speaking, taking those contemporary songs and tagging it with a hymn, or vice versa, taking the hymn and then tagging it like my Savior's love is my Savior's love for me.
Yeah.
No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't light up. Da, da, da. Going into reckless love. Like there's so many opportunities that we can think through of how can we honor the generation that's come before us, but also reach and connect with the next generation that is to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's almost like giving them permission, or letting them know, like, it's okay if you don't sing on this song, or it's okay if you sit and just receive. Because I lead worship in so many different places of different denominations and different, traditions, I always try to be very aware and talk with the senior pastor about, just so I know where I am and who I'm ministering to and kind of some of their traditions, but also just, being really open to say, like, you can sit, if you don't want to stand up and sing, you can sit and just listen to this, and kind of giving them that permission to receive or to be taught. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I love what you said about the next generation coming up of, we really have this beautiful blank slate of, teaching the hymns of the faith. They don't, maybe know the difference because they weren't taught hymns or they haven't been in church. And I think that is just because there's so much depth and beauty in all the hymns of the faith, all the songs up till the contemporary songs that we hear now. So I love that. And I think that is so necessary and needed. And oftentimes for us, like you said, in church world and worship world, we have our mantras and our verbiage that we use often. And I've had to really be careful myself as I go into different churches to make sure that I'm clear and make sure that I'm explaining myself. I was just having this conversation with my dad not that long ago about, I said, I feel like a lot of worship leaders will say, let's press in to the Lord. And he even said, like, I don't really know what you mean by that, and so to be really intentional with our words from the platform and how we're, like I said before, encouraging and bringing them along and kind of teaching them. And that doesn't mean we can't say it, but that means this is what that means.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And yeah.
I think for me, the biggest thing is remembering that there is a biblical mandate to pass on to the next generation how to worship God, how we teach worship, how we do worship in the church. First Hendersonville, we're about connecting every generation to God, others in service. Psalm 145, one generation will commend to the next the mighty acts of God. Psalm 78, we'll tell the generation to come. It says, even the children yet to be born. We need to be mindful of the ones that are even yet to come. Yeah. And for me, that's where I start with worship leaders. I say, here's where we start. This is our biblical mandate. And then from there, you need to discern how God is leading you in your next steps in your context. That could be a conversation with your senior pastor. That could be you're ready to, this Sunday, start using contemporary music with hymns of the faith, like merging the two worlds together. That could mean using students on a weekly rotation and getting them involved now. Or that's just a conversation with the youth pastor of, hey, here's how I want to get students involved in our worship services on Sunday mornings. What does that look like? I think we start with the biblical mandate of what God has commanded us to do, honor the generations that have come before us, tell the generations to come what God has done, and then from there in your local context to see how God is showing you those next steps to move forward with multi-generational worship.
Yeah, I love that. So I have two questions that have kind of surfaced in my mind as we've been having this conversation. And, knowing our context and knowing that a lot of our listeners and a lot of the Overflow family are from these small to medium-sized churches. And, you got to get to know some of them at the conference in October. And so you understand our people a little bit better. So, a lot of the people that we work with and talk with are doing the contemporary and traditional. They have two different services, or they have one and they're trying to figure out like how to blend the two. And, like you said, sometimes there's divisiveness, sometimes there's, tension and that kind of thing. So maybe even just using the church that you're at, even though it's a large church, that doesn't really matter. Maybe using your example, what do you guys do to try to blend the two? You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but
Yeah.
maybe there's some content, some meat in there that could be a huge encouragement to some of our worship leaders who listen and are at that spot where they just want to throw up their hands. They're like, I don't know what to do. This is a mess.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple different ways that you can look at it. If you're in a context where you have a traditional service and a contemporary service, you want to be able to use the traditional. I'm not saying you end it right away. I'm saying with your pastor's blessing, just talk through what next steps could look like, but keep the services where they're at right now. But in the traditional service, if you still have some type of offertory special or a call to worship or some type of reflective song, those are the moments when you can use those contemporary songs, those contemporary worship songs, the new ones, and introduce them in the service. You can even use a choir. Pastor Greg here at First Baptist, they have choir and orchestra, and they use the choir and orchestra to introduce contemporary pieces. In the same way, in our contemporary services, what we would call the band and praise team service, we use those special moments to do contemporary hymn arrangements where we take the hymns and we use that to teach hymns of the faith that have come before us or as a call to worship. So in the traditional service, think through what you can do, whether it's with choir, with orchestra, to introduce those new songs methodically. It's always great to sandwich them in between oldie goldies, keep them sandwiched in between those.
Yes.
In the same way for the contemporary service, walk-in music, if you still do offertory specials, or if you just have moments of reflection and confession, those are the ones where you can sing those songs over them. Strip down those hymns, strip down those songs, and slow them down a little bit to be able to say, hey, this is a song from generations before us. Let's introduce it to our congregation today. You can do that to where you can say, okay, in the next 3 to 5 years, we would love to merge them together. You have to be careful of timing. Timing is everything. You have to move slowly in all of this. If people understand the why behind the what, they're going to follow you. For the most part. There's still going to be some that may not, but they will understand you. For us, when I lead middle school worship on Wednesday nights, I'm with the kids on Wednesday nights. For a year, I'll do 20 songs. And of the 20 songs, 5 of them are just updated hymn arrangements. So I'm teaching the youth hymns to where when they come on Sunday mornings with their parents, what we would call big church, adult church, where everybody goes, all of a sudden they're hearing a song. It sounds a little bit different, but they're hearing a song that they sang in youth group because we were teaching them a hymn. So there's 15 songs of elevation, passion, Hillsong, and then 5 songs of there may be some elevation, passion arrangements of hymns, but we teach them those hymns to where they can come on Sunday morning, whether it's a contemporary song or a hymn of the faith. The students are connecting. The adults, senior adults are still connecting. Like everybody's learning each other's genre and style of music. And again, as always, go in your local context with your pastor's blessing and discern from the Lord what those next steps are in regards to the contemporary service, traditional service. Can you combine them at all for special times of year? This is, and this will be my last thing for this, is here at First Hendersonville, this is the first year for Christmas Eve. We are not advertising specific styles of worship for the Christmas Eve services. We have 5 Christmas Eve services. 4 of them will be simultaneous in 2 different venues, and then 5:30 would be in the main venue. I'm leading in the 2 simulcast services earlier on, but in the main venue at 5:30, and then choir and orchestra will lead at 2:30 and 4 o'clock in the main worship venue both times. We are not explaining that to people. We're saying we're singing Christmas carols, we're doing candlelight, we're doing the Lord's Supper, and the pastor will even have a time where the kids can come up on stage with him and get a Christmas gift. Like, we're not specifying, well, this genre of music or this style of music is going to be at this service. Like, we are being strategic with how we're advertising it because we want people to know we are one church and we're united. But it's taken 3 years to get to a point where we didn't have to discern between the styles and genres.
Yeah. Yes. And what I'm hearing in all of that is that, first of all, it takes patience, right?
Yes.
And it takes intentionality. It really takes a leadership team that is willing to project ahead and think, okay, where do we want to be in 5 years? And a lot of times in ministry, it's so hard to do that because oftentimes we feel like we're just barely keeping our head above water.
Yep. Yep.
And so it's hard to think ahead because we can barely think to Friday
Yeah.
without feeling stressed out. And so it really takes intentionality to step back and say, okay, where do we want to be in 5 years? What are our goals, and what's the core values of this church and with worship? And I love hearing how you guys have done that at First Baptist Hendersonville, and just how God has, been weaving such a beautiful story. And I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So, before we wrap up, my other question with that is then, how do we engage the younger generation on the worship team? So, like, you and I have chatted before, and even just in the little bit we've corresponded about this podcast, I heard you say the death of the youth Sunday, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
Because a lot of times you think, well, if you're under 18, I don't know what it is about that. It's not a church rule, but if you're under 18, you're not on the platform unless it's Youth Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And I that makes me sad a little bit, because I would love for us all to work together. So maybe one or two tips for us, maybe that have worked for you, or just things that you've learned of how to weave the team together as a multi-generational team.
Yeah, so when I started thinking through what this looked like, I've started this concept at my dad's church where once a year the students would get up there and it would be the student band and the student songs, and teenagers always walked away with like, hey, church, these are the songs you're supposed to be singing. Like, we're the next generation, and this is the good music, and this is what you're missing out on. And senior adults leave frustrated and complaining about how loud it was, and students go on this high of like, man, we need to be up there every Sunday. So I remember when I called it the death of student-led Sunday, where I told the students, hey, we're not going to do that anymore. I'm sorry, but it's just not going to happen. And everybody was sad. Parents were upset. I said, the reason why I'm killing it is because we want students to be up there every week. We're going to implement them into the regular rotation to where we have senior adults on the platform, mid adults on the platform, young adults, college students, high school students. We have every age and generation represented on the platform, whether they're playing an instrument or singing, whatever that looks like. We have auditions, so there's still auditions. There's still an audition process. There's still an expectation. I just sent out our new 2019-2020 guidelines and what you're committing to as a praise team member. So high school students still know, like, this is the expectation of me. Adults still know this is the expectation. What I do for student worship is have adults involved in student worship. We talked about the concept of I do, we do, you do. One of my friends, Jason, he introduced this concept to me of, I'm going to show you how to lead worship, then we're going to lead worship together, and then I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader and let you lead worship. And that we do piece is awesome on Sunday mornings when the church can come together and you lead alongside of students. Same thing in a youth group service on Wednesday nights. If adults can be a part of that and lead together with adults and students, I think that's a huge win for the church. I'm trying to think of other things. As the leader of multi-generational worship, be mindful in how you direct the band and praise team, as generations will take your direction in different ways. They receive instruction and discipline in different ways. So you have to be mindful of the life stage and life experience of each praise team member and band member as you lead multi-generational worship, as you lead rehearsals, as you lead in practice, as you lead on Sunday mornings in worship. So be mindful of the next generation. Still do your auditions, still have guidelines and expectations for everyone, but being able to have that rotation in where you can kind of see every generation. They don't have to be leading every song. You can plan with them in mind. You can ask them their feedback. But again, as with the pastor's blessing and as the Lord leads, move forward with saying, we want every generation to know that they can contribute to worship leadership through music, and that our church is for every generation. We'll honor the generations that come before us, and we are here for the generations to come. And my last thing is for multi-generational worship, I always tell worship leaders, it's hard, it's messy, it's very inconvenient, but it is a beautiful picture of the body of Christ. I believe that is what the kingdom is supposed to look like, with every generation contributing. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and I'm sure he had adults all around him who were helping him, teaching him how to lead. In the same way, we cannot limit to, hey, you're in 12th grade, so we can't do it, but 2 months later, because you're removed from high school, now you're an adult, so now you can lead. Like, we can't suppress the gifts that God has given some of our teenagers, because the Lord knows that there are probably some very talented and spiritually gifted teenagers who are ready to lead in some church context, especially if you're in a church of 300 or less. There are probably some teenagers that can help the music ministry at your church, because they probably sing in chorus at school. They probably play in marching band and play several different instruments. Like, we are not asking a part of the body of Christ to contribute. We're holding that back from them. And I think that you can only receive more blessing when you are mindful of the next generation. You don't have to completely flip the tables and start all over from scratch. I'm just saying, be mindful of the next generation and incorporate them into worship leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to that whole idea of intentionality, like that is the future of the church. If we as adults are not willing to train up the next generation, then they're just going to kind of be thrown out to just out in the cold, really, when, we're gone and we're stepping down from leadership, or we want to step down and we can't because we haven't been mindful and intentional to really bring along that next generation. And really, like you said, obviously there's guidelines and there has to be expectations, but if we're not willing to work with them and bring them up when they're young, we're missing such a beautiful opportunity. And even just the young getting to watch the senior adults, or watch the, people who have had years of experience and learn from them. I think it's such a huge missed opportunity. And it, like you said, it is a picture of the body of Christ, and it is a picture of what it's designed to look like. And so I just think that's such a powerful thing when we live and lead with that in mind. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Josh, thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning to share with everybody. I know that, everybody's going to be so blessed and encouraged and walk away with some useful tools. And that's our goal. We just want to encourage people who are in church ministry or, life in general. Sometimes it's just nice to hear from somebody else who's doing life too.
Absolutely.
And
if there's anything, if somebody missed the Overflow Worship Conference, and I can help them in some way with multi-generational worship leadership, there are 2 or 3 sessions I did at the conference, and I'd be more than happy to send my slides and notes so that they can see what would that look like in our context. If they go to the First Baptist Hendersonville website, look on the staff page, and they can shoot me an email at the church. And I would be more than happy to send listeners some of my notes on what it looks like and some first steps, and I can help them in any way to help the kingdom. I mean, that's what it's about. We need to help each other out. And taking those steps, because it is hard. It is tough. It can be difficult at times, but when you have somebody else who's got your back and who's there with you and can encourage you in those times, I would love to be of assistance to churches out there who need help in taking those first steps.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And for all the listeners out there, if you have trouble finding the website, we'll try to put that in the show notes, or you can also email us, info@overflowworship.com, and we'll connect you with Josh so that you can get those resources, because they're pretty awesome. And if you're interested, just let him know or let us know, and we will get them to you. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for listening today. We hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever is ahead of you. Know that we are thinking of you and we are for you. And as you are launching into this Christmas season, I hope and pray that you feel God's peace, even amidst the busy, even amidst, for Josh, the 5 services and the busyness and all of those things. We are thinking of you and praying for all of you, because it is a very busy time of year for those in church ministry. So Josh, thank you again. And thanks to all of our listeners for joining us today. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you for listening to the Overflow Worship Podcast. To stay up to date, please subscribe for the latest episodes and information. To learn more about the ministry of Overflow, visit overflowworship.com. If you have questions or prayer requests, we would love to hear from you. You can reach us at info@overflowworship.com.